She invited her ex to our dinner and said, "He'll always be part of my life." So I let her host alone, packed my bags that night, canceled the wedding silently, and months later watched karma shatter her perfect world while I thrived without looking back. For 3 years, I lived with Emily in a cozy little house just outside Denver. Life felt safe, predictable, and full of plans that seemed certain. We had picked our wedding date, planned a honeymoon, and even opened a joint account where we saved every spare dollar. Every morning felt like a step toward the future we were building together. The kind of future that looked steady from the outside. 2 people working, laughing, dreaming, and believing that love alone was enough to keep everything in place. But love, as I learned later, isn't enough when respect begins to fade quietly in the background, hidden beneath polite smiles and ordinary routines. It happened on a calm Wednesday evening. Emily came home from work, dropped her bag on the couch, and said casually that she had invited someone for dinner that weekend. I remember smiling without thinking much of it, assuming it was one of her friends or maybe a coworker from the office. But when she said his name, Daniel, something inside me went still. Daniel was the man she once told me she could never fully move on from. The chapter in her past she claimed had taught her what love really was. She said his name so smoothly, so carelessly, as if it were nothing. Then she added, "He's in town for a few days, and I'd like to catch up. He was a big part of my life, and I don't want to pretend he never existed." I remember the way she looked at me then, calm, almost expecting me to nodding along like it was normal. That night, the house felt different. It was the same home, the same walls, the same smell of coffee from the morning before. But suddenly, everything felt like a stage for someone else's memory. There was a ghost sitting at our table already, and it had a name. I stayed quiet for a while, thinking maybe she'd realize how strange that request was. But she didn't. Finally, I told her, "If you invite him, then I won't be there." She looked at me, expression unchanged, and simply said, "That's your choice." No argument, no apology, just calm acceptance. And somehow, that hurt more than any fight could have. The days leading up to that dinner were ordinary on the surface but different beneath it. We still made coffee together, still watched TV in the evenings, still talked about work, but I wasn't really there anymore. While she picked out the wine for her little reunion, I was quietly backing up our shared files, moving my savings from the joint account to a new one under my name, and calling the wedding venue to cancel our booking. There was a calmness in me I didn't expect. Not rage, not panic, just the simple clarity of a man who knew he'd reached his limit. I helped her set the table, chose the tablecloth, even made small jokes about the food she was preparing. She probably thought my silence meant I was fine. But what she didn't know was that I was preparing my goodbye. Saturday evening arrived with a certain kind of heavy stillness. The house smelled like garlic, fresh bread, and perfume. Scents that usually felt like home but that night smelled like the end. She wore the blue dress I once told her made her look beautiful. The candles were lit, the music soft. At exactly 7, my phone buzzed with a message from her. "Dinner's ready. Are you coming?" I typed back, "No, but I hope he enjoys it." Then I turned off my phone, picked up my bags, and walked out the door. I drove aimlessly for a while, just letting the road take me anywhere that wasn't there. When I finally passed by the house later that night, I saw their silhouettes through the window. They were sitting close, laughing, leaning toward each other like people who'd never lost comfort between them. It should have broken me, but it didn't. Instead, I felt a quiet relief, like I'd finally taken back something I'd been losing piece by piece for months. The next morning, my phone was full of missed calls and texts. She wanted to know where I'd been, why I'd left, why I was overreacting. I waited until noon before replying with just a few words. "The wedding's off." That was it. No explanations, no arguments. Just a decision. In the following days, I packed my things while she was at work, moved into a smaller apartment across town, and changed my number. She was left with a story she'd have to explain on her own. How her fiancé had walked away the same weekend her ex came to dinner. I wasn't cruel about it. I was just done being the one who tolerated disrespect in the name of love. Weeks passed. I started sleeping better, breathing easier, and noticing the small freedoms that come from choosing yourself. I thought that was the end of it, until I got a call from a mutual friend who asked if I'd seen Emily's latest post online. I hadn't, but he sent it to me. It was a photo of her and Daniel at that dinner, both smiling, wine glasses raised, with the caption, "Catching up with an old friend. Some connections never fade." I remember laughing quietly to myself, not out of spite, but out of the absurdity of it all. Then, hours later, the comments started. The top one read, "So this is what running errands looks like." It was from a woman named Sophie, Daniel's fiancée. By the next morning, the post was deleted, Daniel's engagement photos vanished from his profile, and Emily's social media went silent. Later I heard that Sophie had found proof of messages, photos, and plans between them that had been happening long before that dinner. It was messy, embarrassing, and completely out of my hands. For the first time, I didn't need to do anything. Life handled what I never could. A month later, Emily called me. I let it ring twice before answering. Her voice sounded small, tired. She said, "I just wanted closure." I listened quietly as she talked about how everything fell apart, how Daniel lied to both of them, how her family was angry about the canceled wedding. When she finally paused, I said, "Closure isn't something you get from someone else. It's what you give yourself when you stop looking back." There was silence on the line before she whispered, "I miss you." I replied, "You miss the version of yourself I made possible." And then I hang up. That was the moment I knew I was free. Not because I'd won anything, but because I'd finally stopped fighting to be understood by someone who never tried to understand me. Months later, I met Sophie for coffee. We didn't talk about revenge or heartbreak, just lessons. She said, "People like them don't think they're doing anything wrong. They just keep testing you until you finally stop playing along." And she was right. Today, I live alone in a smaller house, quiet and peaceful. I still keep a bottle of that same wine on my shelf, not as a reminder of pain, but as proof of growth. Sometimes, when the evening light slips through my window, I think about that dinner I didn't attend. The night that looked like betrayal, but became my beginning. Because sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do isn't to fight or shout. It's to walk away calmly, leave the door open for karma, and let silence tell the rest of the story. Months passed after that night when I drove away from the house I once called home, and life slowly settled into a rhythm that felt both foreign and familiar. My new apartment was small, just a one-bedroom with a narrow balcony overlooking the street, but it was peaceful in a way that four walls hadn't been in a long time. There were no raised voices, no uncomfortable silences pretending to be calm, no emotional guesswork. Just me, the hum of the city, and the sound of my own breathing. For the first time in years, I wasn't living inside someone else's story. I was finally living inside my own. The first few weeks were strange, like waking up in a different body. I'd still catch myself reaching for a second coffee cup, still glancing at my phone expecting her text, still thinking about what to make for dinner for two, until I'd remember. Those habits faded slowly, like the smell of perfume that lingers in an empty room long after the person has gone. Emily tried to reach out a few more times after that call, but I never picked up. Her messages shifted from apologetic to angry, then back to sad. She wrote things like, "You can't just walk away after everything," and "You didn't even let me explain." But there was nothing left to explain. The moment she opened the door for her past, she closed the door on our future. I read her words once, then deleted them. That act alone, pressing delete, felt like taking a deep breath after holding it for too long. The silence that followed wasn't lonely. It was healing. It was the sound of boundaries being rebuilt brick by brick. I stopped wondering whether she regretted it. Regret wouldn't change the truth. You can't build a future with someone who still looks over their shoulder at yesterday. Then, out of nowhere, came the message that tied everything together. It was from Sophie, Daniel's ex-fiancée, the woman whose comment had blown the whole illusion apart. Her message was short and simple. "Hey, I think we've been through something similar." I remember reading it twice before replying, "Yeah, Seems like we have. We agreed to meet for coffee a few days later, not because I was looking for anything beyond closure, but because there was something almost comforting about talking to someone who understood without you having to explain every detail. When I first saw Sophie walk into the cafe, she looked like someone who'd been through a fire but had managed to walk out without burning entirely. She had that calm look of someone who'd stopped asking why and started accepting what is. We sat across from each other with 2 cups of coffee between us, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she smiled lightly and said, "It's strange, isn't it? How 2 people can destroy so much just trying to keep one foot in the past." I nodded because there was nothing else to say. We talked for hours that afternoon, not about them, but about the ways people justify the things they should never have done. She told me how Daniel had spent months talking about closure too, how he claimed he just wanted to catch up with Emily, the same line I'd heard. He'd even told Sophie that she was paranoid when she questioned his intentions. I remember laughing softly when she said that because it sounded so familiar. There was something remarkably human about sitting there with someone who had been wronged by the same people who had once lied to us both. It wasn't about revenge. It was about realization. We both understood that sometimes people don't mean to break you, they just don't care enough to stop themselves from doing it. Sophie said something that stayed with me long after that day. They don't think they're hurting you. They think you'll always forgive them. She was right. And in that moment, I knew I was never going back to that version of myself, the one who made excuses for someone else's disrespect. After that meeting, Sophie and I stayed in touch occasionally, not as friends trying to heal together, but as 2 survivors of the same storm who didn't need to revisit the wreckage. We'd exchange a message once in a while just to check in, and every time we did, I felt grateful that life had given me that small twist of poetic justice, not in the form of revenge but in the form of understanding. Watching everything unfold from a distance was enough. Emily and Daniel both ended up losing what they tried to protect. He lost his fiancée. She lost her reputation. And in the end, they both lost the very people who once believed in them. Meanwhile, I was building a new life from scratch. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest. I started traveling on weekends, driving up to the mountains, sitting by lakes, and learning to enjoy solitude without feeling lonely. There's a big difference between being alone and being at peace. I finally knew that difference. I stopped checking social media altogether because I realized the best closure isn't watching someone regret losing you. It's reaching a point where you don't care whether they do or not. A few months later, I heard from a mutual friend that Emily had moved back in with her parents. She deleted all her accounts, stopped talking to most people, and was apparently taking time to find herself. Maybe she finally understood what it feels like when the world you built starts falling apart because you took someone for granted. I didn't feel pity, just a quiet acceptance that this was the ending she wrote for herself. I didn't need to add anything to it. One evening, I was sitting on my balcony watching the sunset spread across the sky when my phone buzzed with a message. It was from an unknown number, but I knew instantly who it was. The text said, "I'm sorry. You were right about everything." I read it twice, then locked my phone without replying. I didn't need to respond because there are some apologies that don't need to be heard. They just need to exist. She needed to say it. I didn't need to read it. That, in itself, was closure. Now, every time I look back on that night, the night I chose not to attend the dinner that was supposed to test my worth, I realize it was the first time I truly chose myself. I didn't slam doors or make a scene. I just walked away from the table where respect was no longer being served. That decision changed everything. Taught me that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's just the quiet decision to leave before you're forced to beg for dignity. I still keep a bottle of the same wine she bought for that dinner. It sits unopened on my shelf, not as a memory of pain, but as a symbol of peace. Every time I see it, I'm reminded of the moment I took my power back without saying a word. Life has been steady since then. Simple, clean, and uncomplicated. And if there's one thing I've learned through all of it, it's this. Sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't destroying someone else's peace. It's protecting your own. Because when you finally stop chasing explanations from the people who hurt you, You make room for the kind of peace that no one can take away. And that's what real freedom feels like. The quiet knowing that you walked away without losing yourself in the process. If you felt every word of this journey, if you've ever been broken but came back stronger, then hit that like button, smash that subscribe button, and press the hype button to keep the energy going. Because trust me, more stories of karma, strength, and sweet justice are coming your way.